Thursday, May 30th, 2024, is now etched in all of our collective experiences. The day a jury found Donald Trump guilty. The day a man who spent his life outrunning lawsuits from fellow citizens, civil cases from government officials, regulatory probes, federal probes, congressional inquiries, a record-breaking 2 impeachments in 1 presidential term, a historic RICO charge, and an unprecedented 2 federal indictments. The defendant who outran, delayed, or punted accountability on all of those cases over many years, which involved all kinds of evidence of wrongdoing, found he could not outrun a jury of his peers. After 2 days and more than 9 hours of deliberations, they unanimously found him guilty on all counts, as you know by now. A former president convicted of felony crimes for the first time in our nation's history. The news broke. We will be revisiting that tonight and going forward with some very special guests and new information. But this is a time, if there ever were a time, to slow down in our fast-paced lives in the way our media, including, yes, television and internet media, rushes forward to the next thing and the next thing and the next iteration of the thing and the implication of the thing. This is a time to absorb what we just went through. It was not so long ago, May 30th, etched into legal precedent, into law books that will be read and studied for many decades to come, into history books that will try to understand why this took so long in some sense, and then why it happened, and then what will be happening after it, which is our collective future. And it will certainly be written about and studied in whatever mechanisms they use, video, hologram, TikTok, you name it, but in the decades ahead, in the political tomes about this new chapter in a long-running question that outdates democracies, but is at the core of any rule of law democracy, which is this clash between power, who gets it, how we hand it out, and accountability, which is always tested more in how we deal with the powerful rather than everybody else. So I say that as a bit of an opening. I hope it's not too grandiose, but a big picture thought. And right now we are going to turn to something we've prepared for you to begin tonight, to begin this special, and that is how we all went through this from when it first started to break on that day I mentioned, Thursday, May 30th.
We have a verdict in the criminal trial of the Donald Trump.
We are looking at count 1, guilty, count 2, guilty, count 3, guilty.
Breaking news, Donald Trump found guilty on at least five of the 34 charges so far.
That just stopped me in my tracks. I can hear the cheering. Tell us what's happening.
There's an eruption from the...
Guilty on 1 through 5. 1 through 12 we have now.
No one is above the law. Trump is not above the law.
It's accountability. It's exactly what America needs right now. We need for accountability to be had by all those that break the law.
Those jurors were chosen by both sides.
Yes. Count 20, guilty. Count 21, guilty. Count 22, guilty.
I think we can feel proud that the system of justice and the rule of law within liberal democracy has survived.
Count 33 and 34, guilty. Found guilty on all 34 felony counts.
The breaking news, Donald Trump guilty in the so-called hush money criminal trial.
The historic conviction of former President Donald Trump.
The first former president of the United States convicted on criminal charges.
It took a jury a little less than 10 hours to find Mr. Trump guilty on all 34 counts.
The test for us now as a country is whether or not this former president and his allies will have succeeded in trying to undermine the rule of law so that people reject this as a legitimate function of the rule of law in our country.
That is the rule of law, 34 felony counts. The defendant turned convict, looked worn down, even more morose than usual, and we've watched him. I've been an eyewitness in that courtroom. He definitely looked like it registered for him, even if he is a well-known performer, when he exited the courtroom. In Lower Manhattan, there was a mixed mood as the news first began to spread. We've seen people gathered there in relatively small crowds throughout the process. There were supporters reacting with disbelief of the defendant. There were others celebrating, in fact, some more people with the signs of lock him up, jumpsuits, and other types of agitprop came out as this news broke. The rule of law did hold. That's more significant than any commentary or complaints about it. The defendant stands convicted of these felony counts by a jury of his peers. The verdict, front page news all over the world. We might forget sometimes how many people around the world are following this, sometimes closer than some of our fellow citizens. Belgium, Brazil, Canada, Ireland, the Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, the UK. That's just some of those assorted headlines I'm showing you. Front pages galore. Trump found guilty was how the paper of record in Washington put it. The Wall Street Journal, owned by Fox News' News Corp, Trump convicted. No way to spin the basic fact. The LA Times, Trump guilty on all counts. In Miami, a city in where the former president now resides, Florida, guilty. Ex-President Donald Trump convicted on all 34 counts in hush money case. The New Yorker, known to come with a quick, thoughtful, cartoonish spin, showing the possibility of this president, his cartoon hands, potentially handcuffed, although sentencing will wait for July. In New York, where the tabloids have long danced with this figure, you can see guilty and guilty in two of them. In the New York Post, one of the only papers, going farther, as I mentioned in the Wall Street Journal, to take a different spin. Rather than beginning with the facts, they began with the take. They view the rule of law, a jury of his peers, the process having played out as, quote, injustice. Donald Trump's hometown paper, the small Queens Daily Eagle, went with an old school way to put it: Queens man convicted. That Queens man is just that, a man, a person, a citizen. He has rights as a convict, just as he had rights as a defendant. He's expected, of course, to appeal. They're saying they're going to do that. As for the president who replaced Donald Trump, he's also speaking out. He rarely does on this topic, but now that there is a verdict, he spoke about it for the first time.
I just want to say a few words about what happened yesterday in New York City. The American principle that no one is above the law was reaffirmed.
Reaffirmed and reaffirmed against something that some of the optimists and politicians didn't acknowledge as much, that of these 4 different indictments I mentioned, 3 have been effectively punted, delayed, and whittled down to not get to the public or to a jury by the election. And while it shouldn't matter if sometimes there are some delays, the election does matter when the crimes in question involve a coup to overthrow the government, a RICO charge for a related crime to overthrow the election, and in this case, which at one point wasn't clear whether it would go first or not, or go at all, a crime for the original Electoral College election of Donald Trump, which is now classified as part of a campaign conspiracy. 25 guilty, count 26 guilty, count 27, we're seeing that on screen, guilty, count 28 guilty. Those are the first 28 felony counts here as read by the jury. Count 29 guilty, count 30 guilty, count 31 guilty, count 32 guilty, count 33 and 34 guilty. That is Donald J. Trump, defendant in New York versus Donald Trump, found guilty on all 34 felony counts. That is how the news broke. We're joined by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Bob Woodward, associate editor at The Washington Post, known for reporting on the Watergate scandal that ultimately contributed to the end of the Nixon presidency. Also very relevant tonight, the author of the Trump tapes, where he interviewed then-President Trump 20 times. He's also the author of over 20 other books, including books on the last 10 presidents. Bob, I really appreciate you joining us tonight at this pivotal time. Thank you. Your thoughts on the verdict?
Well, you know, I've been obviously thinking about this, and I think what's so important is the criminal conviction. But also there's a subtext to all of this, and that is it has shattered the camouflaged world and life that Trump has had. I mean, it is a body blow to that. And when I did these interviews with him in 2020, the last year of his presidency, I should have brought the audio of it, but this is a selection. So Trump comes on and he says, I have a reputation for not being willing to apologize. It's wrong. I will apologize if I'm wrong. I asked, when's the last time you apologized? Trump. Oh, I don't know, but I think over a period I would apologize. Here's the thing. I'm never wrong. Now that's part of the camouflage, the clubbiness of, well, we know better, we joke about these things. The dagger has been put in this with this indictment and conviction. And just today, this morning, he's talking, I mean, this is again the way he deals with the reality. This morning he talks about violent crime in New York City. He said at all levels, it's awful. Nobody's ever seen it this bad. Now the facts are, back in 1990, there were 2,200 murders a year. It's down 83%. All crime is down. But in this cavalier way, it's not that way. Well, he is wrong. And I think we're going to see the evaporation of that camouflage that he's been living in. And that's the other side of this. We're going to see, and we saw it this morning, he actually prepared a series of untruths to try to defend himself. And I know him very well, having done 3 books and spending the last year of his presidency talking to him. And this is a man who's lost his footing and he, in a sense, has lost his cover of that clubbiness.
We have times in our history where there's an ebb and flow of whether systems and the government leadership institutions are seen as working or not. And as I mentioned, you've covered and lived through much of that in your career. Do you see this as a potential return to that? There was so much hand-wringing over how to put a former president on trial, whether it would be fair. And I said this before the verdict, regardless of what it was, that we were going to honor it and the rule of law, that there were people on the jury who said they watch Fox News, they get their main information from Trump's Truth Social. And yet we came together and we got a verdict under the rule of law. Is that ultimately a good thing and a possible way forward?
Certainly. And I was really surprised. I didn't think that jury would be able to. It really, wait a minute. They said the verdict is in. I couldn't believe it. I was sure there would be people on that jury who were Trump supporters, and we know the Trump rule is you don't have to deal with facts. You just kind of do your own thing. And for them to come in and do this, I think it's a change in the whole spirit of the times. And I think not only does Trump have to deal with that, but I think this country has to deal with that. Hey, wait a minute. There is accountability. We're not going to kind of skate around this. We're not going to have, again, I say, that camouflage that, and Trump is the embodiment of that. And it's stripped away.
It's very interesting when you talk about that being stripped. The one direct comparison we'll make to Nixon is he left office under a cloud of investigation, but the pardon preempted that process. Now, I'll be careful to remind everyone that was a legal process because the president, even a successor with his own relationship, has that legal authority. But it did short-circuit what other things might have been. In this case, it is only the sovereign local prosecutor of a state that's doing this. The federal process is different. The Supreme Court slowed that down. And I want to play briefly some Nixon and Trump. Take a listen, Bob.
When the president does it, that means that it is not illegal.
You have to give a president full and total immunity.
This is a long-running clash between many presidents in both parties who say they honor the limits on the office and then some who don't. Your thoughts on all of that tonight, Bob?
Well, but the power here is a jury went away for a very short period of time, and be fascinated to hear them speak and how they reached this verdict. But the verdict leapt over a lot of history and expectation here, and I think it's obviously the conviction is a big moment, but this undermining of a system where somebody like Trump could protect himself, that, I mean, it's to be direct, it's the boys' club, and the boys' club got shoved in the back room yesterday.
Journalism has an interplay with law enforcement. The police, the prosecutors, the FBI, if it's federal, they can't surveil and track everything. So as you know, there's an interplay, and sometimes it goes one way or the other, and who's finding information first. This now convicted felony crime, Bob, started with Donald Trump's effort to control and subvert media information through a tabloid that ultimately was exposed by journalists and then investigated both by the feds and now in New York. Your thoughts on that, and is it important that we continue to have independent investigative journalists who aren't looking at this through a party lens, but who are creating the information reservoir that then the system can assess?
But that journalism needs to not be partisan. It needs to be fact-driven. And in doing this for over 50 years, you often find somebody will tell you something, or there'll be a document, or there'll be a question from an editor of what's really going on here? What's behind this? What does it mean? And if you have the freedom to explore that in a fact-driven journalism, there are going to be new dimensions. And this is not journalism doing this. This is the criminal justice system in one city. And where Trump was talking about, oh, well, all this crime is rampant. You know, he has a particular way of saying nobody's ever seen it as bad as it is now. And you kind of think, gee, maybe he's right. Well, in the case of crime in New York City, crime in cities throughout the country, it's down. It's down. It's radically down. And he can get on that sled of, well, nobody's ever seen anything like this. And even often my reaction, oh, well, maybe he's right that time. But he's wrong so often. So he's been exposed in a way that I think will endure, as will the criminal conviction.
Final question. You've known a lot of presidents professionally, and you talk to him more than most reporters got to, and we've discussed the Trump tapes previously. Do you think any of this, including the looming thought of house arrest or possible jail in the July sentencing, will affect him, will actually move him? Or does he remain impervious? People might say, who cares? But he's running for office and he could be president again. So his interplay with the justice system matters in many potential ways.
Really important question. And the Donald Trump we watched this morning, I know I watched and heard. I mean, I've spent really 6 or 7 years on this man and his presidency. And he was changed this morning.